Okay, our next session is called Scaling Low Code Without Giving Up Oversight and Control. With us is Chris Geer. He's the creator of Workflows Technical Director for ServiceNow Federal Customers. He has been supporting the federal government for 15 years as both a contractor and technology partner. He spent the last 5+ years demonstrating how low-code platforms can help agencies achieve mission, value, and more efficiently. Chris, you there? Yes, you're there. We'll get your presentation up. Take it away.
All right, sounds good. So hey, thanks for having me today. As Mike said, I've got a background as a technologist, right? I come from a background of software development and software architecture, and looking at software development from that perspective, I've made the migration over to the low-code, no-code world. And the reason I made the transition was because as a technologist, I saw the benefit that it could bring to me and my organization. So now I'm on this side of the table, talking about and evangelizing, hey, what can it do for federal agencies? And when we look at it, we want to look at it holistically, not only all the benefits, but how do you gain those benefits while still maintaining control? So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so just real kind of kicking things off, when we look at the trends, right? I think Trace talked a little bit about this. We're trying to do things quickly. We're trying to be efficient. We're letting our staff be more efficient. And we want to provide good experiences to not only our workforce, but also to our constituents as well, the folks that we serve. And when we do that, right, there's some challenges with that. Shortage of tech skills and talent, which is an area where generative AI, for example, it has some really, it has some interest. Is how do we, how do we do more with less people? Another area is, hey, we've got a lot of silos out there. We've got a lot of applications that have been around for a long time that we can't just replace, but weren't really built to be modernized, weren't really built to be integrated with. And then we have the idea of skyrocketing digital expectations. When we look at our workforce, the workforce is changing. The expectations of that workforce is changing. So how do we adapt to that while still maintaining speed and efficiency? And so when we talk with customers, a lot of the questions we hear and a lot of the asks that we hear are, hey, how do I empower more technologists? As the previous presenter talked about, hey, using AI is a way, but we're looking at it more, how do we empower more technologists within an organization? How do we use the domain knowledge and the human capital that exists and allow them to contribute to the delivery of systems? How do I modernize core systems without replacing them? And then how do I do this all at scale? And really what this comes down to is this really comes down to hyperautomation. And this is probably a term that you've heard if you've read in the analyst reports. But hyperautomation is really a business-driven, disciplined approach that organizations use to rapidly identify, vet, and automate as many business and IT processes as possible. So far in all the conversations that I've had with CIOs and CTOs, no one has raised their hand and said, no, I don't want that, right? We all want this. This is what, this is the holy grail of getting to being able to provide efficiency and speed in our organizations, is being able to automate as much as possible, but also as safely as possible. And how do we do that? It's interesting, there was a recent Gartner quote that came out that said, hyperautomation is irreversible and inevitable. Everything that can and should be automated will be automated. And that's what we're preparing for and working with customers and our partners. And how do we prepare for this inevitable automation of as much as possible? And what does that mean to you? Well, simply, that means your organizations are going to be building applications, probably lots of applications, and potentially with lots of iterations. And I know some of you just got a little nervous when I said that, right? Because this can be a little bit scary. But I say, hey, it doesn't need to scare you. This doesn't need to be a scary proposition. And immediately people start thinking about, well, what about app sprawl, right? App sprawl, what about data leaks? What about lack of training? How do I get my organization ready and prepared to feel safe that I can use a low-code or no-code tool and platform to be able to address some of these concerns? And really, I love the fact that Trace touched on this. And one of her, one of the things she ended with, it comes down to guardrails. It comes down to establishing the right guardrails and defining the application lifecycle for how you want to build applications in your organization. And coming from a software development background, this makes total sense to me, right? You've got a DevOps process, you've got CI/CD, you've got source control, you've got all of that stuff that you would do with a traditional software development approach. And a lot of people look at low code and they think, hey, this is great, I can do all this cool stuff in production. Just because you can do it in production doesn't mean that you should. And when we look at low code and no code development, we believe that having good guardrails and having a good software development practice and following good software development practices is still very much needed. And so what I want to do is I want to look at this. I want to look at the software application lifecycle and talk about, hey, what should you be looking for in low code vendors so that they can address places in the software lifecycle for you that you can feel comfortable with this. And I'm going to use obviously ServiceNow as the example of where we're making investments in each of these areas as well. And so when we look at it, right, what we've tried to do, looking at, in addressing the asks from our customers, is providing tools and capabilities that address every step in the software development lifecycle. And we're going to take a second to kind of look through what that looks like. And depending on where your organization is and your maturity and what you're looking to use low code and no code systems for, different aspects of this are going to be more or less important to you. But I want to kind of give you our perspective on what this looks like for your consideration. And so depending on where you're at and what you're looking to use low code, no code for, one of the first things you have to address is intake. How do we know what needs to be built in the organization? What are the applications that even need to be built? What are the needs that need to be met for us to potentially address with a no or low code solution? And so it comes down to intake. And we think intake's really important because there's very few organizations who are just like, hey, we're going to open it up and let people build whatever they want. There needs to be a process to evaluate what are the needs, how are they prioritized, and what do we want to position as a no and low code app versus position with some other technology. And so, it comes down to simple intake, prioritization, and processing. And so one example is just a simple way to be able to intake ideas, whether this be just an idea intake or you're collecting input from people that want to be citizen developers in your organization, some way to be able to take that input and prioritize it and make decisions. Now, if you've got something like this and you are interested in expanding low and no code into more of a citizen development type model, some of the great benefits that you can get from having an intake process is the ability to do things like automatically provision users in your dev environment with the application created based on their idea, or provide other automation and traceability all the way from idea to production. And so having that co-located on your system makes a lot of sense and it gives you a lot of value. Right, and so that's a simple way to look at intake. And obviously, with intake comes prioritization and review, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when we look at build, every low code and no code platform's got a capability to build. With us, we have App Engine Studio. That's the tool that we talk about with our customers, which provides that single kind of home for you to build applications on top of a platform. And again, depending on your needs, you're going to be looking for different things. One of the things that we like to look at and like to talk to customers about is collaboration. And Trace talked about this as well. Is how do you use low code and no code as a way for people to be able to collaborate together to get a better result than they would have individually? And so one of the things we've invested in is the ability for developers to ask for help or to collaborate with others. And whether that be asking for help, saying, hey, I need help with an integration. I don't have that skill set. Can you please, can you provide someone to help me with that? Or just to invite other people to collaborate with them on their application. Building this into your low code platform allows you to be able to, again, get that traceability and see everything that's going on. And it also makes it easier for the developers of those applications because they don't have to go to a secondary means, normally email or chat, to collaborate with users. They're able to have that all within context. But the other part that comes with this as well is just because you want someone to be able to collaborate with you on an application doesn't mean that it should be a free-for-all from that perspective. And so, giving organizations the ability to allow users to collaborate on existing approved applications without also giving them the ability to just go off and create as many new applications as they want. And we understand that this has always been a concern of low and no code systems, is that app sprawl. And so that's another thing, when you're looking at doing development is, do you have the ability to control what your users are able to do? All right, those are just a couple of examples of things that might be in the build arena, but what happens in validate and deploy and maintain? And so when we look at that, just like you would in a traditional software development project, you're going to be looking at how do you automate as much as possible. And in traditional software development, you've probably heard of CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. The same model applies for low code as well. On top of the ServiceNow platform, we refer to that as pipelines. And you're able to set up pipelines that allow you to say, hey, I've got a dev, test, staging, production environment, however many different instances that you might have, and you're able to set up a pipeline between them to be able to migrate applications as they go through the different gates. And so in your development environment, folks are developing applications and they're able to hit the submit button. And when they hit the submit button, it triggers a deployment request where someone is able to look at that. And you can either automate the fact that, hey, that deployment request gets approved and application automatically moves to test, or you can make that a manual or some other human enhanced process where someone needs to look at it and manually approve an application moving from deployment to test, for example, based on some criteria that your organization might have. And then with that, you're able to run your tests. Again, automated testing has always been a big thing in traditional development. It's also a big thing in low code and no code development when you want to scale. And this is all about scaling. How do you scale this? And so automated testing, whether it's using an automated testing framework on the platform or using some other open source product or third-party tool, you're able to do that in doing instance scans and being able to do all the automated stuff that you want to test whether or not that application is going to meet your standards is really important. And so through the pipelines capability, you've got the ability to automate that just like you would in a traditional environment. And again, in your organization, you can go deep into this or you can stay very light, just depending on what your needs are and what you think your risk profile is. And so that's pipelines, and it's going to take it all the way through production, because what you want to do and what you want to alleviate, again, especially at scale, is the human mistake, the human error of manually moving an application from a dev environment to a test environment, from a test environment to a production environment. By automating that process, you eliminate the potential of human error, and you're able to feel more confident that the application that makes it into production is the exact version of the application that you just tested. And so with that, when you've got applications that are now going to be in your production environment, how do you track that? How do you look at that? How does that all come together? And so really you need to have a comprehensive monitoring capability, and then also the ability to retire applications should you deem that they're no longer necessary. And so when we look about it, one of the things that we've invested very heavily in that we think is very important to our customers is a centralized view of everything that is going on in your entire stack. So your entire environment, which would be dev, test, staging, however many environments, all the way through production, giving your administrators, giving your CIO, giving your CISO the insight into everything that's going on in that environment so that they can feel comfortable that what's going on is within the guardrails that you're trying to establish. And so again, on top of our platform, we've developed a capability called App Engine Management Center, which gives you that centralized view into all of your new intake requests, all of your collaboration requests, all your deployment requests, all of your pipelines, and all of the application usage once it's in production as a starting point for that primary single pane of glass view into all of the application development that's going on in the platform. When you dig into it a little bit further, especially when you want to see what's coming, again, we hear the term app sprawl all the time. Hey, I'm concerned about app sprawl. I don't want to be surprised by all these applications in my environment. Well, again, we've tried to provide tooling that addresses that concern. And so when we look at it, we look at, hey, how do you manage applications that are coming up through that environment, and how do you manage your developers to make sure that the developers are living up to the standards that you set for them? And so when we look at this, application and developer monitoring, again, through this single pane of glass, you're able to dig into not only what's in production, but you're able to dig in what's in my test environment and what's in my development environment. Are there new applications in development that haven't made it into production yet? And what should I be expecting once they get there? Are there applications that are in production, but I see there's a new version currently in test? Okay, great. I see that's in test. I see that it's going through that process. I can see if there's any back and forth with that. And so when that makes it into production, I'm not surprised by it. I understood that it was coming and I was prepared for it. And so it gives you insight into that whole flow and exactly, hey, what's the back and forth between, the number of iterations between development and tests? Are your applications passing on the first try, or are they having to iterate a lot to make it through the testing scenarios? You get the insight into that. Also with this is developer tracking. One of the trends and one of the asks that we talked about earlier was we have a lot of organizations that are asking, how do I empower more people to contribute to this, this development approach? Because I've got more people in my organization that can contribute to application development than maybe just the traditional development teams. And so with that, you've got developer tracking. You're able to see exactly, hey, who are all of the people that are approved developers in our developer instance, and what applications are they working on? Do we have a bunch of full-time people that are working on lots of applications? Do we have a bunch of people that, are working on an application occasionally? They're being brought in as collaborators, and they're in there and they're working. What's their training level? Have they passed all the certifications that we asked them to pass, or have they done all the training requirements that we've asked them to do training for? Is something, that's an area that we're looking to investing in the future as well. And coming down from the, from the perspective of how does this all come together so that I've got a handle on not only all the applications, but who is it in my organization that is developing the applications, and are they the right people? Are the right people involved in those decisions? And the last piece with this is really, hey, once it's in production, how do I keep tabs on it? Did I just deploy an enterprise application that was, that my requirements doc said was going to be servicing 1,000 users every day with tens of thousands of transactions per month, and it makes it into production and I see 3 users that use it on a daily basis? Or do I see that citizen development application that we approved, from Bob, that he built over the weekend, is suddenly being used by 8,000 people in our organization because it adds value to their daily workflow? And maybe we need to, take that on and enhance it and provide more support for it. Having that insight into all of the applications in the environment and the usage metrics that go alongside with them is an area that's just as important for low code and no code as it is for traditional software development, enterprise applications. And so having capability to look into that and see what's going on is critical to the success of your low code and no code development capability. The other part that goes with this is, how do I identify applications that I'm able to retire? How do I look at it and understand, hey, it's just not being used enough to justify it still being out there? That has always been a challenge in the application development arena from the beginning of time. How do I know what's being used and what's not? Because you want to retire applications that are no longer providing the value that they originally did. And so this gives you the insight into that as well. You're able to see the trends and understand, hey, this isn't being used as much as it used to be. Maybe it's a candidate to be retired. Have these capabilities been replaced somewhere else, or can we add these capabilities that are still being used somewhere else so that we can retire this application and consolidate over time? And so with that, and we kind of revisit the software development lifecycle, this is what we look at, right? Hey, how do you support all the way from ideation all the way to retirement with a set of tools so that yourself as either an administrator or as an IT leader or as a business leader, you have insight into what's going on in your environment, and are you getting the value that you expected from the applications that are being built? And when we look at it, right, we look at it from the perspective of, all of the tooling and all the capabilities that come together. And we really believe that the more you do on your low-code, no-code platform, the more benefits that you ultimately are going to see. And so when we drill into it, and one of the reasons we believe that is when you move from manual processes to automated processes and you digitize those, that's great, but that's really only the first step. Where you can take that next is into optimization. And when you look at the ability on a low and no code system, since you've got a consistent user experience, since you've got a consistent data model under the cover, since you have consistent development tools, you can also have consistent process optimization and process mining capabilities that are on top of that. You're able to look at all of the applications that have been built, and you're able to understand how are they being used. What are all of the different iterations and different types of data that are flowing through it? Where are the bottlenecks? How can we improve those applications? Better yet, what are the use cases where users are spanning multiple applications in a process flow, and how do we look at that process flow holistically across multiple applications, and how do we improve that? And so we're big believers in low code, no code, and in looking at it not only from some of the benefits we talked, were mentioned earlier, and Trace mentioned, hey, greater benefits, faster time to value, lower cost overall, but also as you start to grow the number of applications and the number of systems on your platform, the more value you get out of tools like looking from a process optimization perspective as well. And with that, Mike, I'll stop there, and if there's any questions, we can address them, or we can move on.
Thank you. Great presentation. Yeah, I have a question, and we briefly discussed this at the beginning on the security. There's been a lot of talk, going into late last year with the administration and securing the software supply chain. What are you guys seeing at ServiceNow, and is that a common question that comes up with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a question come up. When you look at supply chain, and obviously that's something that we've invested in to make sure that we've secured our supply chain. We try and meet all of the federal compliance standards with FedRAMP or DoD standards when it comes to that. But when it comes to building applications, right, especially in this environment, one of the advantages, again, Trace touched on this. When you look at building no code, or as much no code as possible, it's a lot of drag and drop on the system. So you're not having to leave that system and bring third-party code into your system to achieve those sorts of results. And so from a supply chain perspective, it simplifies that conversation to some degree. But when you are more in a low-code environment, and you are bringing, and maybe you are bringing in examples or whatever else, being able to look at it, from that perspective, which is also, being able to look at it from a security perspective, it is important, which is also why we like to talk about this, establishing guardrails and these governance models, because as you have this, and you're not just building low-code solutions in your production environment, you're doing them in a dev environment, and you're promoting it, it gives you the place to put in those checks and balances to make sure that not only is the system working the way it should, but if you are bringing in third-party, libraries or whatever else it might be in a low-code type scenario, that you've got the checks and the ability in there to validate that those are coming from the right sources before they make it into your production environment.
Yeah, I thought I'd share with the audience here and get your input. I took a picture of it, so on the poll results, and for the poll question we started, Chris, it was 28% now are using it this year, 22% yes, but they're just getting started. So that's a little higher than last year. And then 28% are currently evaluating it moving forward. So my question is there, when potential clients come to you, do they have in mind what they'd like to incorporate a low-code platform, or are they looking, for an industry leader like ServiceNow to, look at the applications they have and look at what some of their goals are, and you recommend, hey, this would be a great place to start? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, people really come from all different aspects, right? There's some organizations out there that have done a lot of research. They have they've come to the table with a low-code or no-code development strategy for their agency, and they're looking for best-in-breed tools to help them execute that strategy, right? And so they come with a certain mindset. They come with a certain set of requirements that they're looking to fulfill. And then we have other customers that come to us more from an aspirational perspective of, hey, this is how maybe we've traditionally done it, or here's some applications that we have that we've struggled to modernize over the years. Is there a way that we can do it with a low-code and no-code system? And we're able to approach it more from a methodology or from a use case perspective. You know, and then there's other organizations. Hey, you know, I met with a great customer last week who is a .NET development shop, and they were looking at, you know, looking at it from, you know, this is how we build code. This is how we do it. And we were talking with them about, you know, adding in a low code and no code system as another tool in their development toolbox, right? It's not going to be a replacement for pro code development, you know, or for traditional software development, but it's an additional tool that they can have in the toolbox to use when appropriate to get the benefits from it. But, you know, to free them up to actually be able to address a larger backlog than they could have before, you know, spending their time in traditional software development methodologies. And a lot of the hesitation that we see from customers, and I'm curious, you know, for the folks to say, hey, we're evaluating, we're not quite there yet. A lot of the hesitation we see from customers is around this guardrails or around this governance aspect. It's like, hey, I like it. I like the idea. I like the benefits. I see how it can apply to my organization, but I just don't get the warm and fuzzy that I can do it at scale securely and safely, and I'm not going to lose control, right? They're concerned about app sprawl, which is why we like having these conversations, because, you know, that's one of the number one, I'll say, roadblocks, or at least conceptual roadblocks that we hear from customers that are kind of looking at it, but are, you know, still kind of on the fence.
But, you know, the number of applications has been well, you know, it's a big thing in enterprise architecture, application rationalization. You know, I've been in many advisory committees where, you know, the agency personnel are just saying they can't get their arms around all the applications they have. And, you know, this sounds like this could potentially be a solution moving forward. Thank you for participating today, and thank you for that great presentation. We're going to go to our poll question now. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
So this is your opportunity out in the audience, where you have an opportunity to schedule a follow-up meeting or appointment with a ServiceNow subject matter expert to continue the discussion on scaling low code without giving up oversight and control. If you'd like to have someone contact you, you could say yes, or the other answer is not at this time. Again, thank you, Chris and ServiceNow, for that thought leadership on that presentation.